And good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever, whenever, however you are. This is OffPlanet TV. I'm Randy Moggins for OffPlanet TV on the Conscious Consumer Network, and we are streaming live tonight over Conscious Consumer Network. And I'm still getting used to TV. This is freaky. You know, when you do radio, it's comfortable. You can sit there and you can basically work in your underwear if you want to, but you come on to a camera and all of a sudden you have eyes on you and it's very creepy. So welcome, good evening. I have a great show lined up for tonight, a guest who is going to bring to the table a considerable slice of history, not only about his well, I'll say his craft lo these many decades, which is rock and roll music, but we're going to talk about some of the subjects that we talk about on this show very often. We're going to talk about UFOs and spirituality and some happenings that have been going on out in Malibu related to the famous Malibu Dome, which we've talked about before on this show, and about ancient civilizations. Before we do that tonight, there's a video clip we want to show you, and then we want to talk for a minute about the importance of independent media. And I'm assuming, Biggie, you're going to go ahead and cue that.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential, with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform being made available to use at no cost to the broadcaster. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live streamed. Catch up on missed or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN High Definition downloads. You can now purchase a high definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high-definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows, which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN free of corporate sponsorship and advertising, CCN has launched the Pledge 300 campaign. This is a realistic goal, with the hopes of securing a minimum of 300 people who will each pledge €10 a month. With this number, we can continue to grow and operate and potentially expand into a second foreign language channel. Without it, CCN will simply not be able to function without succumbing to corporate sponsorship and advertising. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
And There you go. That's the message right now on Conscious Consumer Network. We need 300 people, 10 euros a month, and that helps us keep this network going. Over the years, as an independent broadcaster, I've had to thank the people that have kept my boat floating. It does actually cost money to do this. And so what we need right now is 300 people pledge 10 euros. I'm not sure what that is in US dollars. It's probably about $12 a month. Not a big deal. Listen, here's the thing. Independent media is the only thing right now that is bridging you to real information and fending off the stranglehold of information held by major media globally. 5 media companies control the media assets here in the United States, and globally, the number is shrinking all the time. So it's real important right now that everybody get in the boat and begin to row, and it's not a lot of money. And for that, you're going to get some bang for the buck as well. High definition downloads of all the shows on this network from the beginning in January. So consider doing that. Consider supporting us, supporting this media, which is a bridge of the new media's information stream to you, the listeners out there. And with that, I'll leave it at your good nature and your generosity to support Conscious Consumer Network. And so now on the show tonight, my guest is coming to us. I believe he's actually in Malibu, California. He can correct me on that. He is one of the legends of rock and roll, one of the hidden legends of rock and roll. Many people don't realize that the entertainment industry eats its young, and that was the beginning of the career that my guest tonight had. But he has persevered over decades. He is, I'll call him a shaman in terms of his music, in terms of what he brings to the table. He brings a literacy in things historical. He brings a fluency in terms of things musical. And I want to welcome to the program Merrell Fankhauser. Welcome to OffPlanet TV.
Great to be on your show tonight, Randy. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on, my friend. It's good to finally get a chance to talk. Your history goes back to the 1950s, I believe, in terms of your early rock and roll career. And the history there is the history of a genre of music that's referred to as surf rock, music that basically emanated out of, Hawaii, California, reverberated around the world. I know that in the Carolinas, this music was huge in the early 1960s, and it is music that is a legend of a culture that is still very vibrant, but the music itself became the hallmark of that early California culture that eventually evolved into massive rock and roll movement.
Yeah, at the time that we started playing instrumental surf music, Randy, that title hadn't even been coined yet. That phrase hadn't been coined. And we were discovered, my band, The Impacts, playing in Pismo Beach, California, in the Rose Garden Ballroom in 1962. And a talent scout from Delphi Records took us down to Los Angeles and recorded a whole album on us, and we were all surfers, so we were putting, surfing titles to all of our songs, and they didn't call it surf music yet. And in one afternoon, we recorded a whole album's worth of material, and that album came out in 1962 as Wipeout by The Impacts, and it ended up over years selling 1 million records. And they had us go back down in 1963, January of 63, and do another group of tunes that ended up on a lot of compilation albums. And we were all young teenagers. I was about 17, and we had no idea about copywriting or the kind of contracts you're supposed to sign or anything, and we just thought, the money was going to come rolling in, and after about 9 months later, we realized it wasn't, and that was the story. But that happened to a lot of young bands that started playing this music up and down the coast, and it was pretty amazing. We were one of the first groups to do the instrumental surf music, and then months after, it's like, some magical dust went up and down the coast of California, and there were all these young teenage bands playing this style of music, and most of them went through the same thing that the Impacts did. These smart, savvy Hollywood producers took them all in the studio and recorded them, and the producers and the labels made all the money, and the groups made nothing. But that didn't stop me. I just kept right on going.
That style of music has certain influences on it, largely because of the technology that was coming out. You were basically the generation that picked up the guitars that were the brainchild of Leo Fender, the solid body guitars with the vibrato on them. How much influence did you feel in terms of earlier? Some of my memories of this, and I was pretty young then, but I'm a student of this music. I remember the Ventures, for instance, as an instrumental group, and I'm not sure where they fall in the timeline, but surf music seemed to be characterized, by that unique kind of tremolo sound, that twangy type sound. Where did that come from?
You're exactly right. The Ventures were all friends of mine because I ended up getting to meet them at the Rose Garden Ballroom, because all the big bands of the day, we were playing at the biggest auditorium in between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It held 1,500 people, and bands like the Ventures and Dwayne Eddy, they all played here. And the Ventures were before the surf craze. They came along, late 58 and 59, and I remember a friend of mine and I were driving along, and we heard Walk Don't Run, the Ventures' first hit, coming over the car radio, and we drove over to the side of the road and went, wow, what is that? And of course, you're exactly right. The vibrato tremolo arm on the Fender guitars really added to that sound, and the Fender tube amplifiers that they made then. And a lot of people say, oh, if Fender hadn't invented that Fender reverb, you wouldn't have had that sound. Well, that isn't true, because when we first went in the studio and recorded, Fender hadn't come out with that reverb unit yet, and that was chamber echo that were built in most of the studios in Hollywood.
Right, like big plate echoes, right?
Well, no, chamber echoes. Actually, like in the studio we recorded in, and in Capitol Records, the big building there on the corner of Vine, it's an actual room. And I got to go in and look at it once, and they poured the concrete to where it went round. At each, there were no corners. It was all round, and they put a speaker at one end and a microphone at the other end. And that echo in there, and the delay, certain people would only record in certain studios because of that chamber echo. Then later they came along with the plate reverb, and then of course Fender made this spring reverb, in a box, so you could have that sound on stage. And we were all, well, I know for myself as a guitar player, we were all trying to emulate the power of a wave. And that's what we were trying to put into that music. And I find it so interesting now, Randy. I still get emails and letters from young people, teenagers and people in their 20s, saying, what kind of guitar did you use on that song, and what are the chords to that song? So it's really neat that all of these young people, have still gotten into this music, and it still seems to be going. And then when the movie Pulp Fiction came along in '94, they had all of those surf bands in there, and I was playing in the Revels that had one song in there called Comanche. That really lifted the instrumental surf music back up into the spotlight.
That music is, like I said earlier, it's the hallmark of a culture that evolved. And this is like real American history, it's West Coast American history, because at that time, a whole generation was being brought into existence because and let's talk about this a little bit, the post-World War II culture, the affluent economy that we had, what the burgeoning youth culture, and this idea of, something that people in previous generations didn't have, which was leisure time. And we have this surf culture that grows up in California, and this music, anybody that has heard Wipeout or any of the surf genre music immediately gets the image of the great big curled wave. Throw this up here again. You can't see this, Merrell, but we're showing the cover of the Impact's Wipeout. The big waves, the guy on the surfboard, the woodies, all the things that were emblematic of a culture that, like I said, it spawned the youth culture, and it began in California. Now, you're not a native Californian. When did you move to California, and what did you find as the cultural differences in moving there?
If you read my bio or my book that's out now, my autobiography, I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and my dad played guitar, and he showed me my first chords. Actually, they bought me a ukulele when I was about 11, and we moved to California around 1955, and I started listening to the radio, and people like Carl Perkins first affected me. And then my dad he was a pilot, and he was doing a weather project back in Tennessee, and he came back and said, "Merrell, have you heard of this guy named Elvis Presley?" And I went, "Elvis who?" And so then it made it out to the West Coast here where we live. But where I live, I don't live in Malibu. I'm up the coast about two and a half hours from Malibu. I live on the Central Coast in a little town called Arroyo Grande near Pismo Beach, where we got discovered. And this area, Randy, it's like you stepped back into the early 60s. You see the Woodies, the 55 Chevy Nomads, all the old cars. People are surfing, and there's still bands around here that play that music, including me. Every time I go play somewhere, I have to play some of those older surf tunes. And so I'm living in an area that it never went away completely here, and it's still going strong. And then, as you probably read, I moved to Maui for 15 years, and that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, because that goes into some touchstones that you and I have in common, which is the story of Lemuria, or as we know it, Mu, the MU, the Lost Continent. And in terms of the music culture that you grew up in it probably one of the most exciting, turbulent times in music history, at least, especially in terms of the West Coast. Music had largely in the early days been influenced more by New York, Chicago, and obviously, the various jazz scenes. But as rock and roll took over, something happened in California that really changed forever. In terms of the surf music, you kind of lived through a transition into what later became another West Coast scene. Can you explain a little bit about your career in terms of moving through surf music and then moving into the mid to late 60s when we had this cultural revolution that completely changed the face of, well, everything, but certainly music.
Yeah. Well, surf music, as you know, instrumental surf music, and even my friends, the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean, who did vocal kind of surf music with surf themes, it all kind of got set back when the Beatles came on the scene in 64. And around 1964, my dad got a job over in the desert just north of Los Angeles in a town called Lancaster. And he was taking over this airport and doing flight instruction and had a flight school. So we moved over there, and oh man, what a shock that was to me, because I got so used to this beach scene, and you know, this is a semi-tropical climate here in the ocean, and there I am transplanted out in the middle of the desert, you know, nothing but tumbleweeds and rattlesnakes. And so I met some young guys there, and we immediately started a band, and we ended up calling it Merrell and The Exiles, and a local record label and studio, Glen Records, heard us at a dance, took us in and auditioned us in the studio and liked it. And over a period of time from about 64 to 67, we recorded enough material for almost 2 albums, and I think they put out about 5 singles on us that all got us on television in Los Angeles. And it was, well, it was our own kind of music, but it had a bit of that British sound, a little bit like Buddy Holly, which, you know, sort of was like what the early Beatle stuff was. And then after 67, as you know, the psychedelia really came in. Yeah. So we started doing these like folk rock psychedelic songs that I was writing. And then I formed another group called Merrell Fankhauser and HMS Bounty. They got signed to a big record label, Uni Records, and they put our album Things out, which was mostly folk rock psychedelia, and that album sold really good, and 2 of the songs got on the national Billboard charts, and that group stayed together for quite a while. And then around 1969, that group disbanded, and Jeff Cotton, a guitar player who had played with me in The Exiles, was playing with Captain Beefheart's Magic Band, kind of an avant-garde blues rock band. Yeah. And he got back together with me, and we said, what are we going to call the group? And we were doing all these gigs, and every weekend we'd tell the agents a different name because we couldn't decide on anything. And one day I was cleaning up the log bin. I had moved down to a suburb of Los Angeles, Woodland Hills, and I'd rented a house. And next to the fireplace was a log bin. And I was cleaning it out, and I found this 1932 edition of The Lost Continent of Mu by James Churchward. And we all started reading this book, and we got completely enthralled with it, and it was talking about how the North and South American Indians claim to have come from this submerged continent and now submerged in the Pacific Ocean. And so we saw that the Hawaiian Islands were supposedly the mountaintops of this lost continent of Mu. So we ended up, to the record company's dismay and to our promoters and agents' dismay, we said, we're moving to Maui. And they went, what? You know, what are you going to do there? Yeah. So we went there kind of on a sojourn, and I was totally wrapped up in trying to find ruins of the lost continent of Mu. And we set up there, and the last person that had done a big concert there was Jimi Hendrix in 1970.
Rainbow Bridge. Yeah.
Rainbow Bridge. And there were people left from that movie that lived there, that were in the movie and telling us about UFOs they'd seen while they were filming and everything. Yeah. And I was always interested in UFOs because I was a pilot too, and I was interested in things that flew. But anyhow, I ended up meeting a nice old Hawaiian guy. A lot of the Hawaiians, Randy, wouldn't talk about Mu. It was like a taboo. Even though there were a couple of books put out about it in Hawaii, one, a very interesting one, was written by a Hawaiian named Leilani Melville called Children of the Rainbow. Well, I kind of found a friend with this old Hawaiian guy, and I was talking to him about Mu, and he said, there's something I will tell you, but don't tell anybody I told you. He said, down in that valley 2 miles from where you live, and I lived on the edge of the rainforest, he said there are 4 pillars down there and a stone walkway and a platform that is believed to be from the people of Mu. And he said, I used to play down there as a child, and when my parents caught me, they were very angry and said, don't go down there. That's taboo, and the Mu people will get you. And I went, oh boy, this is great. So I went down this trail, and I took my camera down into it, and I felt like I was doing Indiana Jones before the character was invented. And here were these 3 pillars still standing in a semicircle on what looked like a Mayan Indian platform with this very tight cut stone and this pristine waterfall just coming down between them with a pool. And the one pillar on the right side, there were 4, it had broken off and was laying in this pool. And I just had goosebumps the whole time, and I was trying to take a picture with my camera, but I didn't have a flash, and it wouldn't, they all came out too dark. But then I noticed to my left, there was a sidewalk leading off from these pillars and this platform going under the how bush, which is like a giant hibiscus that grows up 80 feet tall. And I crawled on my hands and knees on this sidewalk of cut stone, clear down to where it went off the edge of this cliff and into the ocean. And I could see it going under the water, and then I could see the lava, dried lava flow that went over it. Well, that lava flow that was on that side of the island was 800 years old. So I knew that whatever this was in the sidewalk, it was older than 800 years old. And as I walked back up the trail, I found a place where I could get a side view of one of the pillars with enough light, and I took a picture of that, and that's in my autobiography, Calling from a Star, the Merrell Fankhauser story, that's on Amazon.com. And it's also at my website, merrellfankhauser.com. There's a picture of it there. So I kept looking, and I had various other discoveries that I made there on the island.
Now, back up just a little bit, and let's talk about, you read which of, James Churchward published, I think, a trilogy of books on Lemuria, is that correct?
Correct, and I have all 3 of those, but what I first found, Randy, was the first book. It was hardbound, and it was the 1932 edition of The Lost Continent of Mu, and I still have that.
Yeah, book. I read these when I was probably about 15 years old. I read the trilogy of them.
Wow.
And became completely captivated by the story of Mu, Lemuria.
Wow. That is something.
That's why when I was reading through your material, I got so fascinated by this, because this is a subject that I think a lot of people talk about Atlantis.
Yes.
And Atlantis, as we understand it, is a later civilization. But Lemuria, or Mu as it's known, is there's very little known about it. And yet James Churchward, who was a military man. Was he a general?
Colonel.
Colonel.
He was a colonel, yeah.
Yeah. Colonel Churchward put a tremendous amount of energy and effort into this trilogy of books. I think one of them was called The Children of Mu as well.
Yeah, Children of Mu and the Sacred Symbols of
Sacred Symbols, yeah.
And I found those symbols in Hawaii carved on rocks.
And again, for viewers and listeners, Merrell has extensive images on there. These are on your website, right? MerrellFankhauser.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're throwing that link up on the screen as we're streaming tonight. So the listeners, you can just flip over there. And aside from all the other stuff on the website, you can look at these images. But what's interesting to me about Lemuria is that so little has been spoken about it. And when I first read these books as a teenager, I felt such a resonance with this. But I've never met many people that read the books, much less someone who took the time to go and do what you did, which was basically you were living on Maui, and you were doing your own Indiana Jones gig. Hello?
Are you there?
Yeah,
I'm
there.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
We're gonna drop it.
And it's amazing when I hear you talk about this, Randy, because certain people are really vibe to it and other people aren't. So it's like some people really feel a kinship to this. And whenever I find somebody like you that does have that, what is it, a cosmic, relation with it, I think it's really, really neat. And I just kept looking. I moved there in February of 1973, and I kept looking all the time I was there. And some surfers told me about this ruined city that was on the complete other side of the island. There's a part of the island where you drive and the road ends because there's a dried lava field there that's 800 or 900 years old. Mm-hmm. And the Hawaiians, they're kind of afraid to go out into that area too. They call it the King's Highway. And there's this, I would have to call it a rock trail, but you could almost drive a Jeep on it. And it's got these stone walls on each side of it that goes probably 14 miles out into this lava flow. And you look off to the left to the mountainside, and it's hard to discern distances there. Your eyes can't compute it, but you see all of these ruined stone buildings with stone steps and partial walls that are covered up by the lava. So there again, that tells me those stone steps and everything are older than that lava flow. So they're older than 1,000 years old. So you're going along on this road, and then all of a sudden you'll be blocked by a mountain of lava that flowed clear into the ocean about the size of a house, and you got to climb over that. Then you see the road keep going. Well, they told me about a building that's 7.5 miles out there, and it's up on this red like cinder cone on a ridge. And I tried to get a film crew out there, and this was about 1982, and it was just too cumbersome to try to carry the big camera and the tripod. And the rest of the party stayed where we were camping in one of these actual ruined houses. There was no roof, but a rock wall and floor. And we actually made it, me and one other person, to this big building that my friend had dubbed it Lost City Hall. And it's definitely a Hawaiian building, but it's about the size of a drugstore. The thing was huge with these 4-foot thick walls, and they were it was definitely a Hawaiian building, because you could tell the Hawaiians didn't cut stone or anything like the South American Indians did. They just piled, boulders up and then put beams with a thatched roof. Well, over in the corner of this big building was a hole in the floor in a rickety ladder that somebody had constructed, and you could see where they'd made torches out of whatever they could find, but there's hardly anything growing out there. It's not a lush paradise. It's a lava field and there's no water. We went down inside there, and we did have a flashlight with us, and I was amazed. That same cut stone kind of Mayan-like Incan architecture was the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, and that was completely on the other side of the island. And the rumor was that when the Hawaiians came to the islands from Tahiti, there was a white race living there. And in the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, there's an axe head in this case that came from that area that was found there. And get this, it's believed to be of Viking origin.
Oh, that's real interesting. That's very interesting.
So, I was on Coast to Coast AM about 2 years ago. And
with John B. Wells, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a guy and his wife heard me on the show, and it just happened they were vacationing on Maui, and he was into this, ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
And he emailed me, and he says, I got to go out and see those ruins. And we almost ran out of water. We had a party of 6, but only 2 of us went to the big building.
Uh-huh.
And I said, you can get heat stroke, heat exhaustion out there really quick. Make sure you take a lot of food, good hiking clothes and boots and hats, and lots of water. And I didn't advise trying to go all the way out there to where we were. And we just barely made it back out of there and drove to a hotel. We had a room because after being out there for 2.5 days, we knew we were going to need hot showers and rest and relaxation. So anyhow, the guy went out there and he took his wife and he took pictures with his cell phone of the ruins along this desolate, King's Highway, they call it, which is just a rock trail. And he sent them back to me, and he said, man, I couldn't believe it. They were right there the way you said they were. And I put a couple of his photographs in my book. And the problem was, though, they only went out there about 3 miles. And his wife did get heat exhaustion, and he practically had to carry her back to the car. Said he didn't know if they were going to make it. But I talked to him afterwards, and he was all right. But people have told me, oh, man, you ought to take another safari back out there. And I'm too old to do it now. I was in my 30s then. I told him I'd need a helicopter. But there's things there. And also...
why aren't the media, I just dropped that. Why aren't adventurous young journalists covering this?
A British guy went out on that King's Highway and he published these beautiful pictures of it, and it was in the Daily Mail or something. He acted like he was the one that discovered it, and this was just 1.5 years ago, and that he claimed it was a lot longer than it was. He said it was 220 miles. The King's Highway went all the way around the island, and that isn't true, but he was a great photographer. He took some beautiful photographs of it, and he said that he had a hard time, and he was an experienced hiker going out there and making the trek and then coming back. And that's the first that I've ever heard of that. German television in the 70s did go over and video or filmed those pillars that I talked about, but nobody ever heard about that. And then I was hiking down the trail into Haleakala Crater with my band Moo, and the sun was just right over the ridge, and I saw what looked like a pyramid sticking out of the lava flow. And you can go in the crater, and there's actually cabins you can rent overnight, and you got to give them all your information, and then a ranger comes by and checks to make sure you're all right, and you're supposed to not get off the trail. Well, I kept looking at this thing that looked like a pyramid, and I said, I'm going out there in the morning. And the guys in the band were trying to convince me not to, so I grabbed my trusty old camera and started hiking over to it. And there again, it was a lot further. It looked like, you know, it was a city block away, but it was probably more like a quarter of a mile. And I had to jump these chasms, and there's lava tubes, and it was just cutting my jeans and my shoes up. But I made it to this. It was a smooth-sided pyramid, and I estimated it to be about 38 to 40 feet tall. And I tried to climb up on the side of it, but I got such vertigo and dizzy, I thought I was going to be sick. So I climbed back down to where I could get a good vantage point, and I got a picture of it. And that's also in my book. Well, the lava flows right around this pyramid, if you will. And to me, it definitely looked like it was a man-made structure that the lava had flowed around. Well, it got out to the Parks Department that I went off the trail, and they came and questioned me and talked to me, and it ended up in the newspaper. But then I heard about 7 years later, they let the National Geographic Society go over to it, and they bored a hole in the side of it.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to destroy the historical value of something, give it to the National Geographic Society.
With an auger, you know, a powered auger bit. But what they said was they felt it was a capstone of a much bigger structure that was under the lava. So all of these things are in my book, and there's pictures of them. And, you know, I feel like there's a lot more there to be discovered. And one night, the whole band, Moo and myself, were at the top of Haleakala Crater. It's a beautiful place to watch the sunset. And after the sunset, there was a bunch of tourists up there also watching it. This bluish, greenish, pulsating light came into the middle of the floor of the crater at 10,500 feet and lit up the floor of the crater, and we're all just going, what is that? And then after maybe a minute, two more came out of the one bigger one and went up on each side of it, and they formed a tetrahedron, an inverted pyramid, and was shining a light back and forth to each other. So you're looking at this inverted pyramid in the sky, and that went on, I'd say, for about 3 minutes. And there was an older guy there that was in the Navy, and he said, I never, in all my military service or anything, saw anything like that. And about the time he said that, they all went back together as one object and shot straight up in the air.
Wow.
And disappeared. And that, Randy, was, I wanted to see a UFO all of my life. I was always looking, and I was flying with my dad, never saw anything. And that's my one and only UFO sighting.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, so you answered the question that I didn't ask. Because UFOs seem to be kind of a theme of your work. And how interesting that they would appear there and then. That's kind of a synchronicity, don't you think?
Yes, I do very much. And then jumping forward to now, my new CD that's coming out in June on the UK Gonzo Multimedia label, Signals from Malibu, which you talked about at the beginning of the show, that completely threw me, because that happened sort of in a synchronicity way also. To go back a little bit, when I was a teenager, we used to go down to Malibu to go surfing. And one night we were coming out of the water, and there were some local guys there, and they said, "Oh, you guys want to stay around by the bonfire and watch the lights go in and out of the water out there?" And we went, "What?" And we laughed, and we said, "No, we got to get back up the coast." And we were all laughing, thinking they were watching pelicans fishing, because that's what they do up here. Around sunset, the pelicans, will dive in the water and get a fish and fly back out. Well, I didn't think anything of it. And then I started hearing that through the years, people were still seeing this activity. And one night, this old retired World War II radio expert was talking to somebody in Australia on his ham radio, and he dialed off the frequency a little bit, and he got these strange signals. And he was an expert in the Second World War with a rangefinder of pinpointing where the Japanese were broadcasting from. So that was his expertise. And he went, "What? That's coming from a few miles out in the ocean." Yeah. He said, "There's nothing there." And he lived in a house up on the hill there in Malibu. So he went around to the Naval Air Station up the coast a ways and talked to them, said, "Are you doing some submarine activity?" "No, we haven't got anything going out there." But, who knows if they would really tell him or not. Yeah. So he recorded these signals, and somebody said, "You ought to send them to Michael Luckman, who has the Extraterrestrial Research Society in New York." And so he sent them to Michael, and Michael heard them, and he said, "We've got to send these to Merrell Fankhauser." So he sent me these recorded signals, and I immediately identified that there were 2 tracks of signals. It wasn't just one signal. There was a higher blipping sound and a lower undulating sound.
Sort of like a subcarrier frequency, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when I started listening to this, Randy, all of a sudden I heard this like instrumental surf song, if you want to, put a genre on it, with this low guitar, kind of mysterious. And I went in the studio real quick and recorded the guitar part, because I've learned if I don't get these things down, at least so I can remember it, they disappear and you can't remember it. And then I brought the band in and played it for them, and they went, "Wow." So I had some ideas for my violinist to do, and the drummer sat down. And in about 3.5, 4 hours, we knocked the song out, Signals from Malibu, with the signals in it. And when we got done, we were amazed, and we were just kind of tingly all over, going, "Wow, what is this?" And then I realized that there were 4.5 minutes worth of signals that I hadn't listened to. So I wrote another song called Messages from the Dome to those signals, and those are both on the CD, and I sent them to the record label in UK, and they said, "Hey, if you do a whole album of this, we'll put it out." So I did.
Nice.
And it has a picture of the Malibu anomaly, which looks like a big building with pillars. And I was talking to an old Chumash Indian guy, because the Chumash Indians were the natives of this area of California, and he asked me what project I was working on, and he knew about my Return to Mu album, and I told him about this Malibu anomaly, and he says, "Oh, our tribe has known about that for hundreds of years." He said when the ocean level was down at a lower level, they used to fish off of the top of that building. He called it a building, and used it as a peer. And he said, you know, that's from the lost continent of Mu. And I thought I was going to fall through the floor when he said that.
Well, let's do this. We have queued up the videos for those two songs that we would like to share with our audience tonight. So I'm just going to ask Biggie to go ahead and roll those, and we get a 7-minute break while the people in the audience get to enjoy this music.
Wonderful.
You want to go ahead and just intro those videos for us, please, Merrell?
Yeah. If you queued them up the way I sent them, the first one will be Signals from Malibu, and then the second one is Messages from the Dome, and it has underwater UFOs that have had pictures taken. Somebody had some video, they said, of some, but I haven't gotten that yet. But we're going to go down there with the crew with HD night vision cameras and stake it out for a night and just see, you know, if we see anything.
Well, on that, we're going to go ahead and launch the videos. So Conscious Consumer Network people, you get to be treated to our guest tonight, Merrell Fankhauser and his band, as they perform 2 pieces of music in video, and we'll be back in about 7 minutes.
The title track. Merrell Fankhauser's brand new CD, Signals from Malibu. Merrell Fankhauser in the studio with us. From Malibu is the track Messages from the Dome.
And we are back on OffPlanet TV. What you just got to see are two videos from my guest tonight, Merrell Fankhauser, his website, which will be up on the screen throughout this show, merrellfankhauser.com. And these videos are part of Merrell's newest release, which I believe is forthcoming in July. Merrell, talk a little bit about those two videos. I know you introduced them on the other side. The musicians involved with this, and there's a vibe to this music. Specifically, Signals from the Dome has this frequency to it that I think anybody who hears this, and man, if you listen to this in headphones, it will absolutely grab you. The frequencies, these are actual frequencies that were captured.
Yes, the strange radio signals that they believe came from the Malibu anomaly under the ocean is in both songs. And because the message from the Dome is more of a quieter piece, it's more symphonic than it is rock and roll, where the first one is more like, I liken it to a 60s James Bond kind of mystery sound, the first song, Signals from Malibu. But that song was even stranger than the first one for me, because I started listening to these signals and I thought, I should use these too, after I'd already, put the first set of signals in the first song we recorded. So I went out in the studio and sat down at the piano and put on the headphones, and I thought, I better push record just in case. And it's a good thing I did. Yeah. I started playing with these signals. I had no idea what I was playing, really. I didn't even notice what key I was playing in. And I'm not really a great pianist. I'm good at doing background organ pads on a synthesizer or something, and I can play piano, but I'm not really like a great piano player.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Go ahead. I'll pull this back because I want to talk. Yeah. I want to talk about Nicky Hopkins.
Yes. Oh, he was my dear friend, and to me, the best rock and roll piano player ever. But anyhow, I'm working on this song, Messages from the Dome, played it with the piano, one take, and then I went into the studio, into the control room, and listened to it. And I'm going, what the heck? I don't know how I played that. And then my violinist, Sal Garza, came over, and he went, wow. He said, who played that piano? And I said, I did. And he said, right, now you're a concert pianist. And I said, no, Sal, I played it. I said, I just went into one of those trance-like states, and it came out. And I said, and by the way, I've got some violin and cello parts I want you to put on this. So he just sat right down in the studio, and I mic'd him up. And within not even an hour, he had all the violin parts. And then we put one little drum thing in it, and then I put some 12-string and bass on it. And when he got done, he said, did you know that is in E minor? You're playing in E minor. And he showed me that high-pitched signal was in E. So it was playing me or something,
You were playing the minor of the major key.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I met John Lennon once in the 70s at my friend Harry Nillson's house. And we were talking about songwriting. And I had got to play a song for a whole group of people this was the Lost Weekend when Harry and John got in a lot of trouble in Los Angeles.
They sure did.
Yeah.
Smothers Brothers are still pissed off, by the way, about that.
Yeah, they heckled them.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I played my song On Our Way to Hana for John, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting. What inspired that?" And I told him, that I wrote it on Maui and what it was about and everything. And then he and I got away from the other people that were there, and we were talking and about songwriting and how interesting it is that a feeling will come over you and you'll know something's going to come out. And he would say that he would get this nervous feeling. And he said, we're just the vessel for this. And it's really like somebody else is writing it and you're just the person that's transcribing it and putting it down. And he called it automatic writing, which I've experienced quite a bit. And this was definitely one of those experiences where, it was like automatic writing for me when I came up with, I think, both of these songs that are on the Signals from Malibu album that will be out in June. And the interesting thing, I've been on, quite a few radio shows lately, and the ones that have played it, there were two female hosts that said it really affected them in a way. Yeah. And one of them was actually crying by the time she finished the song. So
those frequencies, that song, and I got to tell you something, I didn't quite get to that, but I listened to the songs you sent me. I put them on my Android phone, which I listen to in headphones, similar to these. I got to tell you something. I sat down and just listened to the music. I stopped everything. And people who meditate know that you move from a beta state to an alpha state. And then from there, you can go further down into theta and even delta if you're an experienced meditator. I found myself entering into an alpha state, going into trance.
Yes, you're exactly right. So I think I almost feel like those signals played me. Yeah. And the other interesting thing about these signals, Randy, do you know Dr. Bob Hieronymus that has a show in Maryland?
I know who that is, yes.
Yes, well, I was on his show maybe 2 months ago, and he said, Merrell, I want to play this for you. And he played the sounds that were recorded by Billy Meyer. Have you heard of the Billy Meyer?
Yeah. Well, obviously,
UFO
I'm a ufologist.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very.
Yes, I didn't mean to.
but
he had those queued up, those signals, and you could hear Billy Meyer's dog barking in the background. He played those signals. Then he played the signals from my song, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I went, "Ooh." They're almost identical because honestly, at first, when I first got them and I first heard about this and Michael said he was going to send them to me, I was thinking it was, our government with some different code or something they had, and it was coming from a ship or a submarine. But when I heard that, I was convinced that no, that they were too much the same. And if Billy Meyer made those signals up back in 1970, he had some equipment that wasn't invented yet. And for it to be the same as these now, there's definitely a connection there.
Well, I think most people, and you had a UFO sighting, and that's a profound sighting, seeing what you saw on Maui. Most people who have had some type of contact experience say that this is a spiritual thing. That I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we sow into our consciousness the desire for this contact. I mean, you spent all of that time on Maui, and clearly you had an intentionality to want to be able to experience a UFO, and you got that. But there's a spiritual component to ufology and that's part of what I try to bring out. I'm not so much into the craft and all the data and stuff like that as I am about people's consciousness and their spiritual connection to something. And I think that's a lot of what you're talking about as well. And when I hear this music, it's very clear that there's some kind of spiritual connection occurring.
You're completely right. And not even a year after I saw that UFO on Maui, not the Dalai Lama, but a lot of the Rinpoches and a Lama that was just under the Dalai Lama, Karmapa, came to the island of Maui, and we had a retreat. And because I had already been meditating and studying the Rosicrucian philosophy, and then I got into Buddhism, and so I got to play music for this Lama that had never heard music, modern music from the West. And he asked me through a translator, where does the music come from? And I said, everywhere. He told the translator, good answer. And we got to do a question and answer with him. A group of about, probably 100 of us were there at this retreat on Maui. And I asked them if they believed in extraterrestrials. And they all said yes. And there was an interesting thing. A Sioux Indian medicine man was there at the time, and he said the same thing. And then I asked him about the lost continent of Mu, and they both said it's in all of our writings, in all of our legends. And the Mu symbol, the four forces symbol, the cardinal points, is in the Tibetan symbolism, and it's in all of the North and South American symbolism. So there is a definite connection there. And I ended up having a private ceremony with the Lama, and he gave me an initiation ceremony, and he gave me the name Lodru Jansau, which means oceans of intelligence. Wow. And I wrote a song about it called Oceans of Intelligence after that. And that inspired me to do my first real solo album they call it the Maui album, and it's out there on a Swedish label on CD, but it was originally pressed on vinyl in 1975. And that had some of the highest music on it I think I've ever written. And that can send you into that alpha state, some of that music. And, it's been a learning experience for me ever since. I keep going and going, and I'm just so happy now with over 400 songs written and released that labels still want to put all of this out on me. And Warner Brothers even picked up one of my songs from 1967, Tomorrow's Girl, and put it on the 60s compilation called Where the Action Is, L.A. Nuggets, 1965 to 68. And in 2011, it was nominated for a Grammy. And, it's just remarkable how something you did that long ago can, make a mark. And we're still...
Can I bring you back to John Lennon for a minute? That brief encounter that you had with him, he didn't happen to share anything about UFOs with you, did he?
No, he didn't. And people have asked me that. Did you guys talk about UFOs? Because Michael Luckman, if you read his book, the Alien Rock.
I did, yes.
Luckman
was the source for this story originally when I covered this, which had to do with John Lennon and May Pang in New York City.
Yes.
This would have been a little before the Lost Weekend, or maybe it was after it. It was during the time he was separated from Yoko Ono.
Right.
And they experienced a UFO sighting from, I think they were staying in a hotel in like Midtown Manhattan at the time.
Right. But I heard that they saw him from the Dakota building, too, that he lived in. But, we never got to to talk about UFOs or anything. So I'm not clear on that time frame either, if that was before or after. But what I was getting around to was that Michael Luckman's whole theory was that a lot of singer-songwriters, he feels, have been influenced by an extraterrestrial presence.
Well, absolutely, and you can probably speak to some of this because you know some of these people. The back end to that story was, I did some more research on it. In a later interview, May Pang said that when she was cleaning out some of John's personal effects, she found ufology magazines from the early 1960s that John had collected, and he had told her at one point in time that he had memories of being taken by extraterrestrials.
Huh.
So John Lennon,
I don't know any of this.
yeah, John Lennon, and I had actually published a blog post about this about a year ago. On the record, according to May Pang, that's pretty credible, says that John Lennon feels that he had been abducted by extraterrestrials. So
wow,
that's But the original story did come from Michael Luckman on that, and so it's. I just wanted to know if he shared anything with you about that, because it's
a lot of people have asked me that, and no, we didn't get into it. It was just the whole thing about songwriting, and then him and Harry were so funny together.
Oh my gosh!
It was like watching. I don't know,
a major party.
The Marx Brothers or something, and they sat down at this great big long table that Harry had in the dining room, and everybody was doing various things, and Harry and John were drinking cognac, and they had a bucket of ice on the table, and there was about 30 people standing around the table, and I was sitting across from John next to Harry, and Harry first dipped his mug into the bucket of ice and threw it up in the air and said, what was it, Jerry Schwartzheimer or something like that, who was a big wig in RCA. And then John Lennon goes with his mug, and he goes, Alan effing Klein.
Yeah.
And throws his ice up in the air. And I could tell a lot of the people didn't get it, but they laughed anyway. And I knew exactly what they were talking about. Because Harry had complained before that RCA didn't promote his records right. They were more interested in washing machines and televisions. And he and I wrote in a little publishing company together for a salary before he got signed.
This was back when Nillson was working in a bank, right?
Yes, he worked at the UCB Bank right under our little offices on the corner of Selma and Vine, and we both wrote for the same publisher, and we had to write so many songs a week to get our $75. They paid us a salary.
This was almost like the Brill Building in New York.
It was. And K-Day Radio was in there. Somebody else well-known that went on to be well-known was down the hall for us, but I can't remember who that was. But we both had two famous arrangers working with us on our songs, and the guys that owned the publishing company I was writing for discovered the Doobie Brothers and Bad Company and the Dillards and my band HMS Bounty. So I knew Harry for quite a few years, and we would keep in touch every once in a while. But he was a funny, really humorous guy back then. But with him and John Lennon together, man, it was, I don't know how to explain it. It was like beyond the Marx Brothers or something. And so I had to go to the studio the next day, and I was up all night with him at this party. And so I didn't get to, he said, oh, you'll have to come back. John's going to be around for a while. And they were planning to record something. But then I was so wrapped up with this recording I was doing, and I was recording the song, oddly enough, Calling from a Star, that there's a video on YouTube.
Yes.
of me doing it at the top of the crater. That was the song I was recording. And I had a bunch of really good studio musicians, and I was all into that. So I never made it back to the party, but it's probably a good thing because I probably would have gotten in trouble along with them, you know. That was quite a time.
Some of the musicians that you've recorded with are legends. And I mentioned Nicky Hopkins earlier. Nicky Hopkins interfaces in rock and roll. His role in some of the seminal music of the late 60s and early 70s is so underplayed. He played keyboards with the Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, to name just a few. And anybody who wants to hear Nicky Hopkins, my favorite Nicky Hopkins lines are probably the opening of a song called Monkey Man on Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones. It's these beautiful cascading piano chords that open the song. This is a signature of Nicky Hopkins.
He uses that same kind of sound on a song he recorded with me that's on my Return to Moo album called Queen Moo, and it just gives you shivers. And he used to stay with me when he was out here, and you know, I played with John Cippolina of Quicksilver also, and Nicky would stay here, and in fact, there's some interviews I did with him that are on YouTube that were on a local television station here. And, you know, he was a great friend. It was a big loss for me when he passed away. And Pete Sears and I, from the Starship, did a song dedicated to him called Nicky's Song, and that's on YouTube also.
Well, there's an interesting group of people, the Starship, and I suspect they have UFO stories to tell based on their lyrics. Pete Sears' wife wrote the lyrics for a song. I'm trying to think of the name of the song. I can't remember it. But over the years, Paul Kantner had written Have You Seen the Saucers on a Jefferson Airplane album. So, you know, what you said earlier about the fact that so many of these singer-songwriters appear to have some kind of connection with, we'll say, otherworld intelligences, that's actually a true statement.
Yeah, that's he's not stretching it. You know, sadly, you probably know Michael passed away. I don't know. Did you know that?
I did not.
Michael Luckman.
No, I did not.
He had a stroke and passed away, and he was planning on having me, and he was talking to Mick Jagger and David Bowie. We were going to do a space concert somewhere in Malibu, and he was going to try to conjure these saucers out of the anomaly, if, you know, that is actually what's happening there. And they were looking at prospective places to have this concert, and he had attorneys and a promoter and everything working on it, and he was going to try to do that. Probably he was shooting for the end of this coming summer, but that's not going to happen.
Gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't know that Michael Luckman had passed away. He's you know, he's one of the greats. He's one of the people that I never got a chance to talk to him, but his work has been referenced by me numerous times.
Yeah, that was just a couple of months ago that he passed away. Yeah.
I want to move it a little bit, I guess, to another side here. In terms of the people that you've played with and the shifts that you've seen in music, you've made some pretty rapid transitions over the years in terms of going from very fluidly from different styles. And the music that you're doing now seems very much rooted in your past. How are you affected by the changes in the recording industry? Is this a better time for people like you to reestablish a career? Since the decentralization of the record companies, look, the recording industry is pretty much at this point decimated since the advent of digital music. I mean, you know, obviously they still keep going, but the music industry is not what it was even 20 years ago, much less 40 years ago. Is it a better time for you as a musician now to be able to create and expand on your art?
I think it was more productive and more creative and more easier to get a record deal in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. I think now the record companies, as you know, the larger ones have swallowed up all the little independents. Yeah. And back then you could literally walk down Sunset Strip and Hollywood Boulevard, walk in with your demo of a song or an album, and somebody would be there that would say, yeah, I'll listen to that. That's how Jan and Dean got their first deal with Dora Records, a little label, and they had many big hits. They were before the Beach Boys. But nowadays, it's all switched over, as you know, to the digital world and to the Internet. Well, I will say this, Randy, in some ways, that probably has helped me because I had so many diehard cult fans out there all over the world. I mean, I'm on labels, all over Europe. Even a label in Poland put out one of my albums that I never knew about. And, France, England, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, Italy, Belgium, Greece. In the last few years, this label in Spain has licensed several of my old albums. So I will say that things like YouTube and the fact that people can download a song off the Internet has helped. And I think it's, made me have a reemergence, if you will. And my book is selling really well. And the publisher says, I guess it's a certain length of time. If it sells 5,000 copies, it gets on the New York Times bestseller list, then all the libraries will buy it. Well, I've noticed that lately, the book's been out about 2.5 months. My CD and even these labels that put vinyl out still, the sales are going back up again. It was in a slump.
Vinyl is going through a resurgence.
Yeah. This label in Spain has put out 3 of my older albums on vinyl, and they sell 1,000 copies instantly. But the one thing I will say is, when they first started doing the digital download, none of us got paid. Right. And all of these smart college kids figured out ways to get their favorite songs for nothing. Yeah. And that guy Napster, that just took all these songs and put them out there for everybody, and he made a bunch of money, but instead of the record companies having him arrested, they hired him. And I learned a lesson in about, I guess it was around 2000. I was down in L.A. doing an in-store promotion, and the band and I played at the Virgin record store there. And it was when Return to Moo came out, and, we played and did some songs, and then people bought the CD and lined up to sign it. Well, a college guy walks up, and he has this homemade CD that he wanted me to sign, and it said Merrell and The Impacts. And I'm going, what's this? Where did you get this? And he said, a guy in my dorm makes them for $5 and sells them. So I knew right then on my way driving home, I went, it's all over now. But lately, in the last, I'd say 2.5 years or so, I've started, the record labels, at least the labels like Warner and Rhino and a few others, Sundays, the label I was on from New York, they do the digital downloads legally, and they've been paying me for them. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting almost as much digital download money per year now as I am ASCAP money for, a nickel played on the radio every time it's played. But I've continually, over the years, gotten airplay on songs that weren't even hits, that were obscure, that some DJ found and or somebody called them up and requested them. So I just feel really blessed.
Well, it's pretty obvious that digital technology has been a bane and a boom for musicians. I mean,
Yeah.
just the ability now to be able to use the software that we have, and even the keyboard instruments, we just call up different sounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amp modeling for guitars. I mean, it's not authentic sounding. And trust me, as a guitar player, I would much rather have a tube amp to plug into than a piece of software. But
Oh,
it,
yeah.
it is an amazing time. And I think people like you who are creative, I mean, writing books, doing movies, is one of the ways that basically you've been able to extend your brand. You've basically reached out and expanded your presence by writing, video production, and just, honestly, Merrell Fankhauser is a unique entity with something to say. And I think that's a lesson to people who are in the music industry or who want to be in the music industry.
Yeah, William E. McEuen was my producer on Return to Moo, and he discovered the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
Yep.
Steve Martin, he produced all of Steve Martin's movies. He wrote me a congratulations the other day that really, really was nice, saying how impressed he is with everything I've done, the amount of quality music I've done, and now I have a book. And I've been doing a TV show for 14 years.
Tiki bar.
Called Tiki Lounge.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And it's
Tiki Lounge. Sorry, I got that.
And it's on 5 channels here in California and 3 in Hawaii. It used to be on in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And before that, in the early 90s, in 91, I started doing a show called California Music that was on 150 stations via satellite going across the United States. And so a lot of the people that I'd played with and knew in the 60s, when they found out I was doing these TV shows, that's how Nicky and I met at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in the 60s. And just said hi to each other, and that was it. And then when he walked on the set of the TV show, and he went, "I know you." And I said, "Well, I know you too, Nicky." He says, "Where did we meet?" And I remembered where we met. And it was the same way with Ed Cassidy, the drummer from Spirit. He and I had played on the same bill at a concert with a whole bunch of other bands, and we remembered meeting, but we couldn't remember where it was. And then he and I ended up doing 2 great albums together. So I just feel like I've had a charmed life in that way. And, a lot of people, I'm so glad that you know who Nicky Hopkins is and appreciate him, because a lot of people don't know who Nicky Hopkins is. And I tell them, if you look at his credentials of who he's recorded with, it's like a who's who of 60s and 70s rock and roll. He was playing on Imagine. People think that was all John Lennon, but it wasn't.
Now, that was a credit I missed. I was not aware that he played on Imagine.
No, he told me that he played on it. And there's even that movie that he and Yoko produced. And they're in the studio talking about the session that they're going to do. And he was telling the titles of the songs. And he asked Nicky what piano he'd like to play. And he says, "Oh, I'll play the white one." and that was on Imagine. But oh gosh, Nicky told me so many great stories. I have 2 hours worth of video, and there's only maybe 10 minutes of it on YouTube or something like that. And then we did a concert together, and there's a couple of live songs from one of the concerts we did that I think it's with my son singing Lucille, the Little Richard song. And oh man, he had some stories to tell that were just fabulous.
What we'll do when this show gets posted out to the internet is we'll put a bunch of links up that people can go quickly look at your a bevy of videos on YouTube because I spent probably maybe 90 minutes or so just clicking through videos, including the one where you basically tell your story of the story of your life with photographs and videos.
Huh, that must have been the Return to Mood documentary.
Okay, that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
You know, on YouTube, what happens is everything is about bikinis, because you inevitably wind up somewhere clicking something and you wind up with a female in a bikini. So I get lost on YouTube. You know, hyperlink being what it is, you wind up in some very strange places.
Yeah.
I want to ask you too. You did a sort of tribute to Jimi Hendrix. What did Jimi Hendrix mean to you? Because as time goes on, this really surprises me. My kids who are my kids are kind of spaced apart, but I have a 17-year-old and a 29-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
And they love Jimi Hendrix. And of course they heard him growing up, but my son's an electric violinist who has adopted Hendrix music. And
oh, wow.
Jimi Hendrix is now, the icon of a generation. Talk a little bit about what that meant to you.
Well, yeah, he was a very innovative guitar player. And a lot of the things that he was doing on the guitar, he came along when, they did come out with a fuzz tone and a wah-wah pedal and some electronics he had specially made. And then he's the first person that started really doing feedback with the guitar and using it. And he blew all the British musicians away when he did that. And I saw and heard tones of surf music in there that he was doing.
Yeah.
And he loved Dick Dale. And, Dick Dale played left-handed, upside down and backwards also. And my oldest son, Tim, is left-handed, but he plays it on a left-handed guitar.
Wow.
So I think Jimmy was a big boost to the creativity on a guitar. It pushed everybody else to do more. And the interesting thing was his connection with Mu and UFOs.
Yeah.
We went back to Maui here just a few years ago, and there's a short segment of what we did where we interviewed people that are still living there that were in the movie and hung out with Jimi Hendrix. And they talked about what it was like. There's one place here in the documentary we did that the guy talks about them all seeing a UFO and just standing there and watching it. And some people were freaked out, and it happened in broad daylight near the little town of Lahaina. And in one spot, Jimmy just walks out there and goes, "Welcome, Space Brothers." And they told a lot of stuff that's in our Rainbow Bridge Revisited, mm-hmm. which is also out on Gonzo, and I think it's available on Amazon.
It is. Yes, I saw it there.
Yeah, and it's an hour-long documentary with music, and then it has a soundtrack CD that the label did a great job on it. But some of the things that they talk about in there are very, very metaphysical and spiritual, and they talk about Jimmy and his thoughts on UFOs and extraterrestrials. So
there's a quote. There's a quote, and I don't have any of this material in front of me, so I can't quote it. But I published a quote from Jimi Hendrix where he talked about he talked about the creatures from other worlds, and he said they're very heavy, man. He was clearly in touch with something. There was an otherworldly aspect to him, much like in your music. When you listen to Hendrix music, and if you can listen to it on vinyl, that's as close as you get to the original source.
Right.
The frequencies, again, at times, I can remember as a kid listening to Hendrix in headphones, Electric Ladyland.
Yeah.
Just being freaked out by the frequencies this guy was putting out and bouncing signals between channels and the wild stuff that he was doing with tones and frequencies on a guitar and an amplifier. And again, it comes back to this whole spiritual quest that I think is really in the heart of rock music when you look carefully at it. I've been around musicians most of my life, some of them somewhat well known, and I've discovered that there's kind of like a taproot with musicians, people who write songs, as you kind of talked about earlier in this interview, go into a kind of deep place and something comes out of them. There's like a well of creativity there. And I don't really care what people call something. I mean, the term extraterrestrial, I don't like the term alien so much because I think it's an insult.
Yeah.
We don't know that they're extraterrestrial. We're not really sure where they come from, but that base under mountain, I'm going on a tangent, so you can stop me anytime now. But the base at Malibu, for me, is something I would love to understand more about, because I've done shows with other people who've had experiences at Malibu who have told me there is something quite supernatural, almost extra dimensional about Malibu, and specifically the area around that dome.
Well, what I wanted to tell you too, Randy, is, you know, when I lived down in the suburb of Los Angeles, we used to go over to Malibu and surf and hang out and explore. And up on the mountain above where this anomaly is out in the ocean, there's an ancient monolith with petroglyphs on it. And nobody I've asked, they say they're not Chumash Indians that were there. They don't know how old those petroglyphs are or who put them there, but there's this rock monolith there, and I swear it's almost in a straight line with where this anomaly is out in the ocean. Now, I saw this thing years ago, probably 1971, and you know, I didn't know anything about anything out in the ocean. I just thought, this is interesting. And I know the college kids from the university that's there, Pepperdine, used to go up there and have drinking parties around this thing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that whole area has some very interesting energy about it.
There's a researcher that I've interviewed a couple of times. His name's Robert Stanley. He's a journalist.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
And Bob Stanley has done a lot of work. He grew up in Malibu. And he had what I will just call some pretty trippy experiences at Malibu that include missing time and what we presume to be contact experiences. And he's very much into the petroglyphs and the symbols and things like that. So you know, this is an interesting area of California that apparently there's some activity going on there that nobody really understands a whole lot.
See, a lot of the times I get the feeling that some of the craft or beings or whatever is sighted, that they may not be from outer space. They may still be here, and they're just hiding out in these different places, and they come out, you know, whenever they want to. Like there's a place in Mount Shasta that they claim is a portal. And I talked to a high school teacher, an older gentleman that taught high school up there, and he was telling me about all the things that the kids in the high school and the parents had seen up there that was very interesting. And there's a whole connection to Lemuria there, and they call them the Lemurians that are there.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so somehow I feel that some way this thing about Mu and extraterrestrials, UFOs, whatever, there's a connection there. And, you know, it's something that still keeps my imagination sparked. And I went back to Maui March before last and visited William McEuen, who lives there now. He's retired from Hollywood, and it's always interesting to talk to him and his viewpoint on these things. And even Willie Nelson's musicians, some of them that live there, and his guitar player, who I've known for a long time, he's really into UFOs and crystals.
Yeah,
and he meditates a lot. And we jammed with part of the band over there March before last, and that was a lot of fun. And you and I were talking before we went on the air. You can go to YouTube and see me and Willie and the band doing Wipeout on Maui in 2000. That was in front of 10,000 people. And he pulled out an electric Stratocaster and played a solo on it that sounded like it came out of a 60s Beach Boy record, and everybody was astounded.
Willie did this. Oh, man.
Their jaws were dropped. Nobody had ever seen him play an electric guitar.
No, I don't remember ever seeing Willie play an electric
guitar. Well, look at that video. If you go to YouTube and type in Merrell Fankhauser, Willie Nelson, Wipeout, it'll come up. And he's playing a silver Stratocaster that a friend of mine, I don't know if he gave it to him or sold it to him. He needed some money. And Willie's the kind of guy, he'll help anybody out. He's such a wonderful guy. And he's got a house. He's had a house there since the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, you see that video. If somebody told me, Randy, back in the early 60s, well, one of these days you're going to be doing this song with a country icon, I would never have believed it. But it was so much fun, and he's so accomplished in the dressing room. He said, well, we're going to do Wipeout, aren't we? And I said, yeah. I said, let's go into a harmony lead guitar part on the end of the song. He says, okay, what key is it in? I said, C. He went out there and played that harmony part on the very end of the song perfectly without even rehearsing it. I mean, he's amazing.
Anybody that grew up in the 60s or 70s, people like myself that played in garage bands, Wipeout was one of the holy grails. I mean, that was kind of a litmus test for a lead guitar player. That song has such a history to it and such a vibe that I think it's going to survive the ages. I mean, honestly, Merrell, Wipeout is just one of those songs that's touchstone for anybody that hears it. Yeah,
it's every place I go, people, want me to play it. I can't leave the gig without doing it. And every once in a while when I set in with different bands, it scares the drummers because they have a hard time going from that real fast roll back to the straight time again.
That's
and
true.
It wears
too.
you wears you out.
Wear you out.
And that riff, even though it's a simple riff, it's hard to play that fast. I listened to one of the older recordings I did of it, even after the impacts with the Revels. We did a recording of it. I was playing it so fast. That was about 1992. I can't even play it that fast now. So.
Well, simple riffs are the best. And honestly, I never mastered that guitar line. I mean, I spent hours learning to play it. I was never an accomplished guitar player. But,
well, that's what I told my son. When you do a guitar solo, it has to have a melody, and think of it as a sentence that you're punctuating. And you want to have a nice beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you feel like putting an exclamation point on the end, do it. But so many guitar players, they get into all of the foot pedals and the effects, and it just sounds like they're spraying out a bunch of noodled out stuff that doesn't mean anything. They're just trying to show you, the sounds that they can make. And some good studio musicians told me it's not the amount of notes you put into the song, it's the notes you leave out that count.
That was the philosophy behind a lot of the great bands. Steely Dan is notorious for that. The guys that played leads on some of their songs. I'm thinking of
well, that was the guy, Ben Benet. He played on Calling from a Star, and he played with Steely Dan. He's playing on Reelin' in the Years and Ricky Don't Lose That Number.
That's the lead I was thinking of, too, Reeling in the Years.
That's funny. He's the guy that said that to me, Ben Benet.
Yeah. Steely Dan's arrangements, even the keyboard parts, were very, very simple in chord structure, but the way they were played and the rhythms they were played against were what made the song. There was space there. And then that space became the place where Fagen and Becker would fill in the melody lines and the lyrics, those twisted lyrics that they do. But the artist's songcraft is something that I worry about in the age of computers and rap music. Not that I don't
exactly. That's the problem I have with it. It's cut and pasted together, and it's beats and things that a normal drummer wouldn't do, and it's becoming too redundant and automated. And there's no new melody and creativity to it because they can all use these pieces, and beats that are available, and they just paste it all together in the computer. I like real music played by real musicians, the way we had to do it in the 60s, even before multi-track. We did it on 2-track, and you played live, and what you played was what you got. Nicky and I talked about that.
I'm guessing you're not a fan of auto-tune at all either.
Not really. I don't use it. I don't need it. And,
right. I mean, it's weird because, like I said, I like some modern music. There's
I do
hip-hop music that I've come to appreciate, and certainly
I like that Happiness song by Pharrell.
I
think that's catchy. It's got a good melody, and it's talking about a good thing.
But a lot of the music now is not what I would call nourishing, in the sense that it seems like pop music now is all gloss and production, and it's not the heart of the music that I think our generation actually had. And I'd like to think that that's not going to die with this generation, that songcraft and good production values are something that, other generations will embrace.
You are totally right. We're on the same page. We're going to have to meet up someday.
Well, I get to the West Coast occasionally, and
if you do, give me a ring, and I'll put you on the Tiki Lounge, and we can have a conversation. I've had everybody from Canned Heat to parts of the Starship. I just had Johnny Barbada here the other day.
Oh my gosh, Johnny Barbada, the drummer for the Turtles.
Yeah, and he was in the Starship. And Pete Sears has been here a number of times, and a lot of people. I have a set, that looks Hawaiian, and I have a Hawaiian-looking stage built in my large backyard, and we tape shows back there.
That's awesome. You know who else did something like that? Daryl Hall from Hall & Oates?
Yes, yeah.
Daryl's house, or Daryl's. Yeah. He just started putting them out on the internet, and I guess now it's turned into a television show. What a cool concept to bring musicians together and sit down and jam. I mean, that's
really I talked to them about their recordings, and then we end up jamming, and it's great. And I've been doing Tiki Lounge for 14 years, and there's select shows on YouTube, but a lot of the TV stations I'm on up and down the coast, they don't want me to put them on YouTube till after they've aired for a while on television.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. And I started out, being on TV before YouTube came along, and I put individual songs on there, and some of my older songs that were shot on film, and that's really helped. The YouTube is a good thing.
Well, I see we're bumping up against about the last few minutes of the show here, and although we can float, I want to be considerate of your time. And, truthfully, Merrell, there are so many places this conversation could have gone, but I'm thrilled with where it went. And I definitely extend the invitation for you to come back again. I know
Wonderful.
You got an album coming out in July, is that correct?
It's coming out in June. And, email me and let me know when the link for this is up, and give me your address, and I'll make sure the Signals from Malibu album gets to you. I'll mail you one, and then maybe we can do a little shorter show or something.
Sure.
Then.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I got to talk privately over the next day or two. There's a couple things I'd like to touch base with you on. But,
okay.
I really appreciate you coming on tonight, and I'm grateful that you shared so much of the history that you've lived through, the times you've been in, and the music that you've made so far. But I'm really stoked about the fact that you're still creating music in the 21st century. That's flipping awesome.
It's a pretty good feeling, Randy. Thank you so much, too, for having me on.
My guest, Merrell Fankhauser, MerrellFankhauser.com. You can see it on the video. Wow, what an epic conversation. For those who are younger, maybe we drop some names you're not familiar with. Go to the YouTube links. I think you'll be blown away by some of the musicians that Merrell has played with. That's going to pretty much wrap it up for this show. I actually have some pretty interesting shows lined up in the near future here. We've got some whistleblower material coming, and we're going to do some exposés of Freemasonry in the month of May.
Wow.
And so we've got a lot of things coming up here on the Conscious Consumer Network. That's consciousconsumernetwork.tv. Don't forget to stop over there. Don't forget about the fact that right now we need you to support this network. This is your network, and this is your media. And with that, I think we're going to sign off for this week. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday night, with OffPlanet TV. I'm Randy Moggins. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Keep looking for it.